If it just says call our practice, that's not
Mm-hmm.
really giving value.
Okay.
If you have an ad, say a Google ad, that is a link to your own blog post about something in your practice area, dermatology, and you have an ad on skin redness or something like that, and it takes people to that owned blog post,
Uh-huh.
now you're providing value. They're learning something. A lot of times, at least in the US, you go to the doctor's office, you get a clipboard. That clipboard is for drug name
Mm-hmm.
because
Mm-hmm.
that was the swag that some drug company gave out to promote their product.
Right.
Don't serve your patients ads. That is eroding trust. If your clipboards, instead of having drug name on the clip, had a question that you should remember to ask your provider, that is something that's providing value without eroding trust by just serving an ad. You can use humor to break down that barrier, to, break that white coat syndrome that people have.
Oh.
Because you are, the provider is the authority in the white coat. We know what white coat syndrome is. It's there. It's real. So you can use those reels. You can use humor as a way to build trust. You can go too far.
Mm-hmm.
Where that line is going to depend on the provider, on the practice, on the patients, on your clients, on who's doing it. It's a very fine line, and you need to know your audience well.
Sometimes I wonder if people binge listen to these episodes on like Spotify or something, and they get tired of the way I begin the episodes because it's always hello, 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 everyone. So this time, this time we're starting like this. I'm still gonna say it. Hello, 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 everyone, and welcome back to Scaling Practice Management, where we help practice managers grow smarter, not harder. My name is Jakub Grajcar. I'm the head of marketing at Talkie AI, where we help medical practices stop the phone from ringing off the hook and unburden their front desk team with AI medical receptionist agents. And we're already helping over 300,000 patients every month. My guest today is Joshua Altman. Joshua, how are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm great. I'm great. Do you prefer Joshua or Josh, actually?
Joshua.
Josh is better. Okay, so Josh, a couple words about him for you watchers and listeners so you get the context. Josh started out as a reporter and multimedia producer at The Hill in DC and then built beltway.media, where he works as a fractional chief communications officer, and we'll be demystifying that term later in this episode, for small and mid-sized businesses, healthcare practices among them. Instead of hiring an agency or a full-time comms team, practices can bring him in to run the whole communications function. So that's branding, PR, website, reviews, marketing, all of it. And Josh is here to help us think about how a practice earns trust and actually gets found. That, at least, is the plan for today, although we do get a little bit spontaneous here on Scaling Practice Management from time to time. So we'll see how it goes. Josh, do you do a lot of these podcasts?
I do. I enjoy them. Great way to
Okay.
connect with people.
Okay, so what's your pet peeve? What's the one thing that I shouldn't do today that would kind of drive you mad?
Nothing. You're doing a great job.
Lovely, lovely. Well, let's find out if you like this one. We are starting our podcast episodes with a warm-up game, and we're going to get into that right now. So the warm-up game consists of 2 stages, and it will help decide the first question you're going to get. First, please pick 3 numbers from 1 to 10.
2, 7, 8.
2, 7, and 8. You just picked 3 categories. I'm going to read them to you, and you're going to pick one. And that's going to be your question. The categories are food, talent, and weekend. Which one do you want?
Let's go with weekend.
Lovely. So the question, let's make it, what does a perfect Saturday look like for you?
As easy as possible. Relaxing mostly.
Okay, and how do you relax?
I've got the dog. I do a lot with dog rescue, so probably something
Ooh.
along those lines.
Can you say more about that?
I'm a volunteer dog adoption coordinator, which doesn't sound as relaxing as I probably just made it sound like I like, but you basically get to spend the weekend with dogs and you help people with their adoptions.
Okay, so how does that work?
We hold adoption events. Sometimes people come to them. Sometimes we screen them on the phone in advance and they say, we're interested in this dog,
Okay.
Lily or Heike or Sunny, one of those dogs. And we help see if they're a good match for their family.
So finding them a good home. And those events, what do they look like? What are the activities like?
People come and meet dogs. They're not structured, there aren't games. It's people come and they meet the dogs and take them on walks and hopefully
Okay.
take them home.
Is it like dog speed dating, or am I picturing it wrong?
No one's ever called it that before. We don't like to think of it as speed dating. We want you to spend as much time with the dog as possible, meet as many dogs as you want, take your time,
Yeah.
go, come back, think about it.
I love that. I love that. That sounds like such a cool thing to do. Just earlier today, I saw this hilarious video where somebody had this. You can get like a leash that's like a prop, and it looks like a huge chain. Of course, it's lighter than that, right?
Yeah.
And somebody had this huge chain, and on the end of the chain was like a tiny chihuahua. And they were walking through the through the city with that. More people should do that. You heard about this on the show. Get that novelty leash chain and get on it. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for playing the warm-up game. Lovely to know that about that. So I assume then you're a dog person more so than a cat person?
I am.
Yeah, yeah. Opposite sides of the battlefield here. No, I'm very much a cat person, but I like both. I really like both. I like
We get a
to,
lot
yeah,
of
but
people who adopt both. People come and say, I need a dog who I know will be good with our cats.
oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
And then do you pick one of the kind of calmer ones or the ones that are more playful to play with the cat?
It depends on the dog and it depends on the cat.
Ah, yeah, of course, of course. Cool, cool. But I'm glad we're breaking that stereotype, of
Yeah.
yeah, cats and dogs not getting along together. It's very much not true. All right, lovely. So that's the first tradition of the show done. And then the second is that the next question is the question that everybody, since the very first episode, got on the show, and you will be no exception. It's the traditional question of the show, and that's always where we begin. So, Josh, what is your number one tip for successfully growing a healthcare practice? Let's get into it.
Make all your communications useful. Don't do
Okay.
ads just for the sake of doing an ad. Make your ads useful. Provide value at every step of that patient journey. And that's how you build trust.
And what does that actually look like? Because, I mean, provide value at every step. I have heard that advice repeated many times. I've mentioned that advice many times. I've given that advice, right? But how does it actually break down? So how do you tell that your ads are giving value instead of not giving value, for example?
If it just says, call our practice, that's not really giving value. If you have an ad, say a Google ad, that is a link to your own blog post about something in your practice area, dermatology, and you have an ad on skin redness or something like that, and it takes people to that owned blog post, now you're providing value. They're learning something. You've also driven them to your site where they can learn more and make appointments. But they're not just driving by and saying, hey, call this dermatologist.
I see. I've had conversations about this, I mean, being a marketer myself, of course, right? And I think that the common counter argument is we don't want to like distract them. There needs to be one clear action from this ad, and that clear action should be call the dermatologist. So introducing a blog post is kind of along the way. What if they're not interested in the blog post, but they might be interested in like a dermatologist visit or, anything in that vein? How would you respond to that?
What are people searching for? Yes, some people are going to search for dermatologists near me, and they'll get the information and
Right.
they'll see the ad and it'll have your contact information. It'll have the option to link. If people click, which is what the Google ads are designed to get people to do, then they're going to go to your website where they can learn more. Also, if people say Google skin redness, they are not looking for the dermatologist specifically. They have a problem. They're looking for the answer. They're looking for information. A lot of times people, and you know this if you work in marketing, you know this if you've bought stuff yourself, which we all have, you don't go in thinking, okay, I need to buy X. You have a problem that you need to solve.
Right.
The purchase is the solution. And now, especially with AI, people are Googling skin redness, and they're going to get a lot of information from Dr. Claude or Dr. ChatGPT. And that may or may not be real. Hopefully, they're going to source it from your content, and then people can click through it. So it provides a lot of options. Yes, you can have it linked through from the ad, but you can also work to get it ranked as good AI results.
Yeah, I hear you. So other than ads, where do you think practices and businesses most commonly forget to add value and are a little bit more selfish in their communications? And what's the remedy for that?
Depends on the type of practice that you are. Some things, providers we are, your family doctor, your internist, you see them much more frequently than the surgeon, who
Right.
might be something you see less frequently. Where they provide value, where they provide that information is going to be different. Where they are less good about it is going to be different. And of course, what they need to provide is very different. So they're not taking every opportunity in some cases. They might just have hold music. Well, one option could be, instead of music, play a recording, things you need to remember to ask your doctor, or things people forget to ask their doctor. That's a way people, while sitting on hold, you have their attention, they're there, and now you're giving them useful information as opposed to some boring music track from whomever your phone provider is. That's a way that you can reach people and get them helpful, useful information.
I actually never thought about that, but of course, it's a great opportunity to educate and to really drive home certain things to keep in mind. Of course, I mean, if the practice is using talkie, then there's no hold music because the AI receptionist picks up right away. But for all the others, you can still try that. And even still, I will say more seriously, within the architecture of the AI agent, right, the receptionist also can remind the patients calling in about what they need to prepare for their appointment beforehand. For example, our talkie agents do that. Super, super, very interesting answer to the number one tip question. Thank you for providing that. And we'll dive more into the communications and marketing in just a second here. But first, how about we set a little bit more context? So you mentioned, you started as a reporter at The Hill, and you figured you'd head back to a newsroom, and you never did. So how did that turn into running a communications shop? Take us through your story.
When I left the Hill newsroom, I thought I would be a freelance reporter for a few years, then go back to a newsroom somewhere. And while I was taking freelance reporter jobs, while I was looking for those, I also took corporate jobs. And those were pretty much with small and medium businesses and with startups who needed communications work done, but couldn't afford the $50,000 per month retainer that comes with a large agency. But they still had to get this done, and the person who was doing it didn't want to do it anymore. It was often a founder, a president, a CTO. If you're in healthcare, it could be the sole provider, it could be the practice manager, someone in one of those roles who doesn't want to be doing their communications because that's not their job. But they understand it had to get done. So we came in and we took it over. Over time, that grew into this Fractional Chief Communications Officer. We didn't sit down and think, okay, we're going to plan this out, and in a year we'll be doing this, and in 3 years we'll be doing that. It grew organically as this need really developed. And that happened very much in parallel with the growth and explosion in many cases of online content, where there's 10, 15 years ago, there was a lot. Now there's even more, and more pressure to be doing more, even for small and medium businesses. So as that grew, that need grew, and we came in to fill it.
Yeah, I understand. So what you're saying is you didn't just wake up and thought, okay, fractional chief communications officer, that's what we're gonna be, that's what we're gonna do. It just evolved over time. A lot of businesses are like that, right? And can you break it down for the watchers and listeners what they would be getting by working with somebody like you? Okay, because I mean, I think they understand it at like a surface level. I need help with my marketing because I need more patients coming in through the door, for example. But how does that connect to fractional chief communications officer, and how does it actually differ from somebody who's just helping with your marketing?
Well, so marketing is strategies to build awareness of your brand, your products, and your services. It's about promoting and protecting the brand. It's the social media interactions, it's customer service, it's the printed materials, the website, it's all of that. Chief Communications Officer is a little different. It includes marketing. Marketing is 100% a function of communications. Chief Communications Officer's focus is yes, on protecting and promoting the brand, but it's more of that. It is on one, shaping perception, and two, building and maintaining trust. Those are the two big things. Everything we do comes back to perception and trust. And healthcare is one of the highest trust industries. Every business transaction we make has to do with trust. Some are low trust transactions, some are much higher trust transactions. If you're in healthcare, that is as high as it gets. And our focus is on building that trust so when patients come to you, they are comfortable. And that takes a lot more than just doing marketing and running ads or thinking about branding and how things look. It is a complete integrated approach to all of your communications. Everything from internal communications with employees to your ads to how your brand and your colors and your website actually look. All coming back to, does this build trust or does this erode trust?
Understand. And how does that, okay, so I'm trying to get the full extent of it because, I mean, I wasn't expecting, for example, already to be talking about hold music as part of communications. You're mentioning, internal communications, which not everybody is thinking about. Ads, they might be thinking about colors of their website, sure, but then do the colors of the website match the branding that's in your office? Probably is part of it. But can you give some, some potentially even more exotic examples of where communications happens that the practices might not even be aware that this falls under communications?
A lot of times, at least in the US, you go to the doctor's office, you get a clipboard. That clipboard is for drug name because that was the swag that some drug company gave out to promote their product. Don't serve your patients ads. That is eroding trust. If your clipboards, instead of having drug name on the clip, had a question that you should remember to ask your provider, that is something that's providing value without eroding trust by just serving an ad. We get ads all the time. We get them on clipboards, we get them online, we get them pretty much everywhere that we go. We've seen enough of ads. We kind of just tune them out at this point because we see a lot of ads every day. That's an opportunity that a lot of providers aren't necessarily taking. And that's buying clipboards. And we buy offices buy pens all the time. They buy that kind of stuff. This is just another one, and people are going to see it.
So are you big on that part in particular? Because you're mentioning, I think for the second or third time already, helping the patients, the end users or customers, of course, in a more general context, understand how to be better patients, what to ask about, how to be more educated. So is that like part of the philosophy that you bring in as you look at communication?
With healthcare specifically, it's a big component. Because it is such a high trust industry, people need to feel very comfortable with what they're doing and with the decisions that they're making for them, for their kids, for their families. So everything comes back to trust. And when people see that transparency, see that, yes, these are the things we have to do, it builds trust. And one thing we are big on is looking for places that people aren't thinking about their communication. So like those clipboards, like when they walk into the office, like when they're on hold, all of those things are touch points that you could be engaging with people to build trust. Because just as much patients can find you, they can find someone else if they're not happy. You don't want to erode that trust that you have with them. And that, of course, starts from the very first interaction from that Google search.
Very interesting. I like this topic of trust. I think it's very close to what our audience would like to hear more about. So let's stay there for a while. So what about social media, for example? Because I think some of the practices, I mean, a lot of businesses are wondering like, what are the do's and don'ts in terms of not even, the formats or the channels, but what to say versus not to say on social media, especially if it's, sensitive topics like you're running a dermatology office, some of the conditions can be a little bit more sensitive, right? So what would your advice be? Like, should they be doing, I don't know, funny reels on Instagram, for example? Is entertaining their, patient base a good way to build trust, or can it go too far? I'm trying not to make it a leading question, but you probably see where I'm going with this. What's your take on that?
Actually, the answer is both. You can use humor to break down that barrier, to, break that white coat syndrome that people have, because you are, the provider is the authority in the white coat. We know what white coat syndrome is. It's there. It's real. So you can use those reels. You can use humor as a way to build trust. You can go too far. Where that line is going to depend on the provider, on the practice, on the patients, on your clients, on who's doing it. It's a very fine line, and you need to know your audience well. Another thing very true with healthcare and other regulated industries is know what you're allowed to say. Know what you're not allowed to say. Know what your medical board for your jurisdiction allows. And I'm in the US. Every state has their medical boards. A lot of rules are fairly consistent. Some rules are not. Know what's allowed. Don't violate that.
Yeah, I understand. Are there any good, easy, straightforward ways to find out what's allowed versus not allowed to say for my state, for example?
Google it, look at where your state medical board has rules. It'll all be
Uh-huh.
available. Look at what other providers are doing because hopefully they're also following those rules. Talk with professional associations. So if you are in Ohio, there's going to be the Ohio Medical Providers Networks for, for nurses, for physician assistants, for doctors, for all of that. Well, find out, talk with them. This is a big topic among every industry, especially regulated industries. And those professional organizations are putting out materials on these topics. And when we work with regulated industries, we're always checking. Here's what your board advises. Here is what the next state advises, because you do need to stay within those rules. And that's important.
I understand. Great. So one more thing I'm curious on the note of humor. So do you think using humor in communications is currently in this industry underutilized, overutilized? Like, what do you wish more practices knew or did in this area?
I think it's underutilized because you see this very generationally with doctors and providers generally. People who are more social media native, who are more comfortable with it, are using it differently than older generations. When you have a practice that has that mix, you get to see kind of a good balance where you get some of the humor, you get some of the fun stuff, you get some of the creative posts, but with the perspective that comes from 30 years of practicing.
I think some of the best content out there honestly has that nephew effect on it. Here's what I mean. The nephew effect is when you've got, an older generation like doctor, right, running the practice. And for one day or, as an assistant, they bring in somebody's nephew who's like Gen Z and they know how to do, Instagram content, they know how to do reels. And suddenly the content completely changes. It starts following trends. It starts to be much more relatable and humorous. And when I see that, I gravitate towards that because it's like you can see that this, doctor or CEO or whoever got put in a slightly awkward situation. There's this sense of like tension and play between the person behind the camera and the person in front, but it somehow works because it's so relatable. You know that the main character of the story is a little bit embarrassed themselves, but they're trying their best to make this trend work or something. And yeah, I honestly think that's great. I mean, feel free to like tell
No,
me this is a
that's
mistake, but
100%
yeah.
exactly what you see, because one thing we talk about a lot on every project is authenticity.
Right.
Authenticity builds trust. So when you
Mhm.
see that provider who looks a little uncomfortable on camera, that's authentic. An example we've all seen is the McDonald CEO, because he looked incredibly uncomfortable on camera. And then, of course, we all know the story of what happened at this point. The other companies, kind of took on what he was doing. He got a little, internet, I don't want to say attack,
Yeah.
but it was the focus for being uncomfortable. And then they used it because it was authentic. That was him. And people really bought into it because it was real. As opposed to if they got some Gen Z person who's just working at a McDonald's to do that same video, it would not have had nearly the same effect, and we wouldn't still be talking about it.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. I
that
think
is
that's
what
very
made it
cool.
very effective, was it was authentic. My background was in production, in video
Mhm.
production very
Mhm.
specifically, and people ask me, "Well, how good does everything need to look?" Like, you don't need Hollywood level production anymore. In fact, that can hurt you. There are still a couple things you need. You need it to look good enough, which means lights. People need to see you. They need to know who you are. Okay. Two, they have to be able to hear you, which means a decent enough microphone. So earbuds pretty much will be good enough for most cases. You got those two things, you're 90% of the way there in terms of the look and the production quality, because it comes off as more authentic, because it is more authentic. Authenticity is very difficult to fake by its nature. You have to
Yeah.
really just be authentic, and it works.
Definitely. Definitely. I think, and I would 100% second that advice, also including the caveat that, you need good audio and you need good lighting and video. But other than that, yeah, I think there's much more to be said here for, experimentation, putting out a lot of within the confines of what's, compliant and legal, right?
Yeah.
Putting out a lot of different content formats, trying, do a Q&A, do a skit, do a trend and see what happens. So that's really, really interesting. But that's just part of this whole pie of like communication and trust, right? So we wanted to get to more so kind of revisit the high level here. So we focused for a little bit on one aspect of this, but tell me more about building trust in general, and especially in this, context of a medical practice. How does that break down? What are the most common mistakes that you see? And do you have a particular approach towards that?
The approach is authenticity, like we just mentioned. And probably the biggest mistake is not talking to people in a way they understand and not reaching them where
Okay.
they need to be reached. If you're too, there's this balance between being far too casual and far too clinical. There are some websites, in the US, Mayo Clinic, Cleveland Clinic, they are great resources for people, and they do strike that balance very well most of the time, in that
Mm.
the content is accessible for people who just need to read it and get the information without being overly clinical, while also not dumbing it down so much that if the clinical information they're asking doesn't get across. There's a lot you have to do, especially in healthcare. And those are examples of where they frequently do a very good job. Those are also two huge practice clinics, hospitals, organizations. They have large staffs working on this and devoting a lot of time to striking that balance. One thing that works is have the person's credentials on the page. Let's say you have 3 doctors. This was maybe not written by, but medically verified by Dr. Smith, and you have that information there. So the person knows that this medical information was verified. It wasn't written by me, Joshua, Fractional Chief Communications Officer with degrees in journalism and communications. There was a healthcare provider actually involved in this process and verifying all this information, while
Yeah, and I
also
think
someone
yeah.
else helping with the accessibility and the trust and the approachability components.
Yeah, I think now more than ever, right? You want to see the name of an actual person that takes responsibility for this content, especially in the medical context, because there's so much, AI generated content, for example, out
Yeah.
there, so that you want to know that there's a person behind this, somebody that you can trust, somebody who has, like you mentioned, the credentials. And in the medical space, of course, it's much more formalized than in some other spaces where there are the titles associated with that. That's a very cool, particular tactic to use here to build this authenticity and trust. I wonder if there are other such low-hanging fruits that you typically see missed.
A lot of times you're going to see that on social media. We
Uh-huh.
love Substack. It's a great place for a lot of people, a lot of users, both as readers and as producers, because it is social, but also gives you space to really write. There are people running whole complex publications on Substack with videos, with podcasts, with live streams. That's a great platform. You can do live Q&As on Substack. You can post just a video to camera on Substack. And then what we talk a lot about is repurposing content. Just because you do it on Substack doesn't mean that's where it always lives. Take a 15-second clip, that becomes an Instagram. Take another 30-second, 1-minute clip, that could be a LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Just because you did it once doesn't mean that's it. That's where it lives, that's where it dies. Use it repeatedly, as many places as you can. And think about that when you're building the content. That comes from the first conversation is about this particular piece is how can we use it and where can we use it? How can we repurpose it? Because the providers are busy. They don't have time to start making a lot of content. If they're taking 10 minutes to sit, write, review the content, make a short Substack video, that's a good chunk of the day that they're now not seeing patients. So
Yeah.
use that, and also know your audience. If you are working with, if you're a pediatrician, you're dealing with families and kids, know that. Know that you're now very specifically trying to reach parents. What are parents' concerns? And of course, you do this all day. You're the provider. You know what these are. Don't break character. Don't create a character because now you're on video. They come to you for a reason. You know their concerns. Talk like you're talking to these parents, because that's who you're talking to.
Yeah, that's a difficult habit to unlearn, actually, to try to bring your day-to-day, in conversation persona and your on-camera persona closer together, right? Maybe you won't talk on camera 100% like you would in conversation, but typically people leave this huge gap, right? They start talking much more formal, like it's a speech when they're on camera, and you don't really want that to build a sense of authenticity. Thank you for expanding on that. I wanted to touch also upon another thread that already popped up a little bit in the background of this conversation, but something that I think is at the back of the minds of a lot of practices right now is, okay, I just learned, it feels like, what SEO is about, what Google is about, the importance of having a website and content. I just started wrapping my head around that. And now there's AI in the picture. And now people aren't looking for me through Google. They're looking through ChatGPT, through Claude. And even if they're looking through Google, there's the AI overview to think about.
Mhm.
So what's the, in a nutshell version of how to adapt to that sort of new world in search for medical practices?
The good news is the core of these things remains very much consistent. AI, where does it get its results? Some of it, and there are lawsuits about this, are from search results. It's looking for highly ranked search results. The Google AI, that Google AI overview, those are top search results. There's more that goes in. There's schema, there's markup, there's metadata, there's a lot. But those basic core principles of high trust content that has value, that other sources say has value, is good. Of course, these AIs do scrape things like Reddit because it's accessible to scrape. It looks at a top comment that says, aha, this is authoritative. It doesn't know, wait, that was a joke. That is something you have to contend with. That is really for the AI companies to contend with in terms of serving up relevant answers. But you can still be a highly relevant response. And one way to do that is think about how people are asking questions, how people are getting there. So go back to an example I mentioned earlier. Someone might say, looking for, say, skin redness, what is this rash? Why is my skin red suddenly? Well, that might be what they type in. So create an article that literally answers that exact question. That is the title. Each subsection can be, your skin is red because of X. Your skin is red because of Y. Make those the subsections. Okay, now you're looking for how people are searching and really being responsive to it.
I think I would add on top of that I think there's a different level of specificity now in play where it is worth it. I think one of the best things you can do to improve your understanding of AI search is to ask some of these queries in like ChatGPT and Claude and to check, because sometimes you can see that within its kind of chain of reasoning, what it actually searches for and how long the queries are, right? Because a human pressed for time and busy would search for something like skin red why, or why is skin itchy, right? But the AI typically wants to include more of the context, and the phrase is going to be different. It's going to be, why is skin itchy, 35-year-old male, peanut allergy, or something like that. It adds that right into the query I've seen. So it also pays off to have more specific articles in turn to match those phrases that are being searched for now by AI that people didn't typically search for.
So that's
when
where
it
the
was just
content
humans.
repurposing really comes in. So what you can do is you start with that very broad question. Why is skin red? Why is skin itchy? Okay, now the next question, that brings you to, say, 3 to 4 different subsections. Well, each one of those, maybe one of them is peanut allergy. Okay, well, now you have a whole article just on peanut allergy, answering that question with 4 subsections. Each one of those subsections now becomes its own article. This is how you keep repurposing content and you don't run out. One of the big concerns people come to us with is, well, we're going to run out if we keep posting all this. You won't. We've never had that be a problem because of how we keep thinking about this and how we keep iterating on it.
Okay, so I hear you. And I think the next thing I would love to know about is, I wonder how this applies to scale, right? Because since we're talking about content and you seem to be a proponent of, having an active blog or active social media, information on your website, that's all well and good. But I think you would agree there's a big change in that depending on the scale of the practice, right? Because if it's, a single provider practice or a very small practice, they only have room for a certain amount of such activity, right? Versus a practice that's kind of closer to the mid-size part of the scale. So I wonder if you could take me through, and take the watchers and listeners as well, through how this content production or communications work shifts through the scale of a practice.
When you're trying to do it yourself, if you're the practice manager at a 1-2 provider practice, it's going to be very hard to do it yourself. You don't have a team devoted to this. That's why you bring in the Fractional Chief Communications Officer. We give you those tools that a bigger practice has without hiring a full-time communications department. Because a mid-sized practice might have 3 locations, 10, 12 providers. They might have a marketing assistant. They might have a communications director. They're going to have these things that facilitate just creating more and being more responsive and knowing what to create. So it's not just about volume, it's about capacity. If you have more capacity, yes, you can create more. More isn't necessarily better. And that's something that does need to be kind of figured out depending on you and your practice. But the way we all have the algorithms, they control everything we see. We all know that at this point. If you create a post, it's doesn't just show it to every one of your followers. It's showing your post to some subsection of your followers. If it does well, it goes bigger. If you post too much, you're essentially crowding yourself out. So there is a balance to strike. A lot we find with the smaller practices is they read a blog post where they heard from someone that to be successful, they need 3 posts per day plus 5 comments or interactions. And that's the only way to grow. That's not true. Because like I said, you can crowd yourself out. Also, you're going to be spending a lot of time doing that. What we want you to think about is, what is the cadence that works for you? If it's 3 a week, that's great. If it's 2 a day, be careful because now you might crowd yourself out. It's doable, but you could crowd yourself out. And you have to create a lot more, especially if you're doing video and visuals or graphics, anything like that. Just the creating of it takes a lot more effort. Bigger practices have that capacity. So you might be seeing that they're doing a lot, but that volume does not necessarily translate into efficacy.
Yeah, I understand. And I do agree, it's better, I think, to have like one strong content series. Let's say you post on Instagram, let's say it's Instagram, right? Even once a week. But it's something that people really love, like again, maybe like a series of skits, or maybe like an in-depth Q&A that you run just once a week or once every 2 weeks, where you answer common questions. But it's, as we mentioned, authentic, in-depth, educational. People wait for the next installment. That's going to give you so much more than just, reposting, I don't know, quotes, right? From books, etc. I do wonder though, because initially when I asked you like what a smaller practice can do, and you mentioned like one option is of course working with somebody like you. Getting that fractional help. I do wonder though, if you were in their shoes and it wasn't in the budget to work with a fractional chief communications officer, what do you think they could feasibly still do? A smaller practice, provider owned, that could still fit within their time budget, so to speak, and could get them results.
Well, one thing about the fractional model is it scales. We work with everyone from 5 hours a month to 20 hours a week. It can really fit into a lot of different budgets. If that's not where you are yet, and we do recommend you start as early as possible, because it's a lot easier to build from an earlier stage than to come in the middle, although for 95+% of products, we're coming into something that already exists. We're not starting from true zero. If you really can't work with someone, take some time. If you're the practice manager, maybe you take 2 hours on every Thursday afternoon and you've blocked off the time, and that is our communications time. And then if the provider needs to review it, they know they have blocked out 1 hour on Friday morning and it's on their calendar, just like it was a patient appointment, that this is what I'm doing. Block out the time. Treat it just like any other appointment, because that is the only way you're going to be able to make time for it, because these offices are busy. We know how frequently they're booked and how hard it is to move things around, but you have to treat it like an actual patient appointment for the provider that they are reviewing on Friday morning. And that is what you're going to have for the week. And you know it's there. And if you want to add something, you write a great article that you know your patients will like, you can, of course, always drop it into Instagram, make a one-off post. That's always something you can do.
Right.
But you know you've created your content for this upcoming week. And you have to do it by blocking off the time and treating it as blocked off time.
I love that. I love that because it's very, very practical, right? And I do wonder if we can get even more specific about it. So I'm hearing you say, to this provider, okay, block off time on a Thursday. There's 2 hours, and you use that to create your marketing content. The probable next question is going to be like, okay, I just reached that slot on my calendar. I've got those 2 hours free. What do I do? Do I write? Do I record myself? What would you recommend? And I know you're going to say it depends on the specialty, the specifics, right? Let's say it's a family practice, for example. Let's start there. What would you recommend to them?
One thing you can do, and we take every project through this, is work through our 4 languages model. It's one of our 2 main frameworks. And is what do people read, see, hear, and experience? So what you could do is say this first 2-hour block that you have, you might not even be creating anything for the next week. Just take a piece of paper, divide it in half. Read, see on the front, divide it in half, hear, and experience on the back. What do your patients read? We all get read. It's kind of the most obvious and intuitive of the 4 languages. It's the stuff we read. What are people seeing? That's videos, that's graphics, that's photos, that's everything that they're getting when they just look at their phone and endlessly scroll for hours and hours on end. What do they hear? That's things like podcasts. It's the hold music. It's the music in your waiting room. And what do they experience? You might think what people experience are appointments. People experience the pharmacy. But it's also what people experience and how they experience what they read, see, and hear. So how are people experiencing what they read? Is it mobile? Is it desktop? How are they experiencing what they see? Are they watching it on their TV? Are they scrolling on their phone and watching YouTube videos? Are they casting it? Where is it native? Are they hearing it? So podcasts are a great example. So if you're going to make these kind of Substack audio things and then maybe repurpose it, well, are they making that appointment viewing? Like, look, I would love if people made our podcast here appointment viewing and they sat down and they watched it every week and that was what they did and we had their full attention. Most people don't do that with podcasts. For most people, they're listening while they're making dinner for their family. You could be like me, and your podcast time is when you're driving or when you're walking the dog. 2 activities, those should both have your full attention. The podcast is just on. That's a big difference in experience between how people are thinking about it versus just sitting and watching. So maybe that's the first thing you do on that first 2-hour block is you really fill out that paper. Okay, now the next week, we can create something that covers as much of this as possible for how people are consuming our content. We know it's a family practice. We know these are mostly parents. So maybe they're listening to this podcast while they're making dinner for their kids. So we make audio clips on Substack with that in mind. We make videos with that in mind. If we know people are going to be watching while they're on their phones, while they're scrolling, we know we need to make something that catches their attention within the first 3 seconds and then goes back to start telling the story. That's a common format for a reason, because we know it works to get people's attention, as opposed to you're sitting in a movie theater, you have your big bowl of popcorn. Okay, that has your attention for the next 2 hours. You have paid that ticket price to give that your attention for 2 hours or however long the movie is. They don't have to do a 3-second attention grabber and then go back to start the video. Like, there's a different way to tell that story. So that's what I think about. And then, what were your appointments today? What are your appointments tomorrow? Those are things you can talk about. Obviously not the patients, but these are the concerns people are having. If you're a family practice, it's the summer right now, back to school is coming up. Talk about school physicals, talk about things that people get, the kids are going to bring home from school. Those are all common. Once cold and flu season's coming along, that's a lot of content. And that's going to be coming in the door. You know that because it happens every single year. You can plan for this.
I love that. And it starts, from first principles, which I really appreciate. On top of that, I would say I'm a big evangelist actually, of the content conversation flywheel. What I mean here is, as the provider, you're so well equipped to actually inform what you might not even know is your content strategy, right? Because you have these conversations all the time, just like you mentioned. Every conversation can turn into a piece of content. Of course, don't say, Mary Smith said this and here's what I think, right? But you can always start with, I talk with a lot of patients about problem X, and here's how you can, prevent it before you have to see me, for example, not catch the flu this season, etc., etc. So I love that. I love that whole approach. And on the subject of frameworks, one thing I definitely wanted to capture from you as well is you mentioned that you explained to me on a previous call two frameworks that you followed. One you already mentioned based on senses, read, see, hear, experience. But the other one you mentioned is story versus narrative versus brand. I mean, I hear those three words. I think a lot of people are going to kind of conflate the terms. So
Yeah.
take us through that framework as well and how that will apply in this sort of scenario, or if you want to apply it to also, this larger mid-sized practice that might be more relevant there. But what would you say about that?
It's very similar for both. So one thing I mentioned already is that people kind of come to us once they have stuff. We
Yeah.
come in at the brand stage in almost every case. Think of it like a pyramid. The story it has characters, it has the situation, the setting, the beginning, the middle, the present. You're not at the end. The story is still being told. It has the dots. It is how you tell your friends what happened while you're sitting at the bar and then you order another beer. That's the story. The narrative it answers the questions. It's what we say about the story. It's how we want people to think about it. If the story has the dots, the narrative connects them. It's what we want people to conclude from our connected stories. And then the brand and this is where people bring us in nearly all the time. It's the swag. It's everything people connect with. So brand is every touch point someone has with your business and everything that contributes to the stakeholder experience. So going back, like I mentioned, it's that hold music. It's those clipboards. It's the greeting people get when they come into your office. Are you using a real assistant, or do you have the people in your office freed up and you're using an AI receptionist? Those are all part of the brand. And people come in at the brand stage because people think, okay, I need all these things. And you do. And then they realize they're missing the story and the narrative. The brand is kind of floating there, but it doesn't have the story. It doesn't have the narrative to really build it for people to understand. And that's what makes creating content a lot easier for you. When you know the story, you know your characters, you know your setting, you know it's patients in your clinic who you see, you know it's families with kids, you know the situations, that it's back to school, that there's cold and flu. You have these things and you know how to connect those dots through the narrative.
There's a lot of layers to this. I mean, of course, you just mentioned three of them, but I do wonder, so how does this connect in reality, in practice? I can picture the clipboard. I can picture the hold music. I can picture the swag. But how does that connect to what I have written down in my narrative and the story, to the characters I've got, or the emotions associated with the story? How does one influence the other?
If you sit down, you figure out your story, take one that we all know. It's not a healthcare practice. Let's say we take Apple. We know Apple. Their story is it was the Steves. They were in the garage. We kind of know how that developed. Now they have the big keynote addresses and we have iPhones. A lot of stuff in between, but those are kind of the big things. Well, how does that connect? How do you connect the garage to your iPhone? Think about it that way. Well, it's the trend. It's that they've been all from the very beginning, simple products. You go back, they have that simple visual OS. It's ways that you can use computers in a very easy, accessible way. And now it went from the big things on our desk to the little things in our pockets. But
Simpler.
you can draw that line directly from those first early machines in the garage to the latest iPhone.
So the past of the story is important. And I think a lot of practices can allude more to that, to where they're coming from, right? I think I saw some practices, for example, leave their childhood photos of the doctors on the walls, for example, just as a way to connect with them more as people. Maybe I'm misrepresenting or misinterpreting what you mentioned
No,
here,
that's because you are part of it. How you ended up here as the
but yeah,
provider
exactly.
is as much part of it. You are one of the main characters in this story. People need to know you are a person and not a white coat.
I love that. I love that. And I think that's actually a great note to keep in the watchers and listeners' minds as we tie a bow on this episode. So remember that you're part of your practice's story, that you're the main character and not just or one of the main characters, and not just the person in the white coat. There's a lot more to dig into here. Of course, we could talk probably for several more hours, especially,
Probably.
yeah, especially with my background in marketing. Of course, I'm curious about a lot of things, but there's only so much time that we have in a given day, on a given day, in a given episode. So where can people find you and follow you for more, Josh?
Easiest way to reach me is by email, jaltman@beltway.media, no.com. Check out our website, beltway.media, again, no.com. We are on most social channels as @the Comms Chief, and you can find me on LinkedIn at linkedin.com/in/Joshua I. Altman.
Lovely. How well organized. This will make creating the show notes a breeze for this episode. So I appreciate that. And I appreciate you, Josh. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Thank you for sharing what you know. And a lot of topics we touched upon today. Really loved it. And thank you, watchers and listeners, so much for joining us here today. Don't forget to, of course, subscribe to the Talkie YouTube channel, follow and rate Scaling Practice Management on all of the platforms, and make sure that the next episode reaches you, because this is it for today. This has been Scaling Practice Management. I have been Jakub Grajcar, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye, everyone.